What's up everyone, welcome to Drummer's Perspective. My name is Ben Todd and I'm here to help broaden your scope of what's possible as a drummer. Thanks so much for checking out this video here today, whether you're watching here on YouTube or you're listening on the podcast. I really do appreciate you wherever you're coming in from. If you are here on YouTube though, please subscribe to the channel. That really does help me out and it lets you know next time I got a video coming out. Now today I'm really happy to bring you a conversation that I had with the incredible Jack Robert. And if you don't know Jack, he's absolutely crushing it on the Australian touring festival scene at the moment, playing with a huge variety of artists, but most predominantly he's playing with Tkay Maidza and Thundamentals. Now in this chat we talk about quite a variety of topics, but most specifically we dive into some of the nitty-gritty details of the kinds of festival gigs that he's doing. Everything from how his playing approach might change from gig to gig, whether that be on a big festival stage or a smaller theatre club environment, to the logistics of what it looks like to play on a festival, the day-to-day timelines of those kind of things, when they can get access to the stage, the kind of gear that you might be playing, all of that kind of stuff we cover, as well as Jack's career path and some of the things that have happened to him and he's made happen for himself that have led him to be in the position where he is at the moment. We also talk about Jack's experience as a musical director and how he approaches doing a gig like that from the drummer's point of view. This was such a really very fun and interesting conversation, and I know that there's a lot of really useful and tangible advice in there for all you guys and girls out there. So please, for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with Mr. Jack Robert. Before we jump into today's conversation, I want to offer you a free gift, and today that's my 7 ways to attract more work as a drummer PDF guide. If you feel like you're working on all the right stuff, you're seeing improvement in your playing, perhaps you're actually quite established in your local music scene, but still you're not working just as much as you would like to, then this guide is perfect for you. Here I offer you 7 ways to reapproach your development and your progression as a drummer and offer you a fresh perspective on some things you might be able to change in your development to hopefully bring in a little bit more work. The best thing about this guide is that only one of the tactics involves picking up a pair of drumsticks at all. So if you're feeling a little stuck, frustrated, and tired of not being able to be out there working and playing more, then please head to drummersperspective.com/7ways and grab that free downloadable PDF guide right now. Jack Robert, man, thank you so much for doing this today, man. I've been following what you've been doing for a long time now, and you're just, doing some absolutely incredible, inspiring, amazing gigs, and I think you've got a lot of really amazing real life experience that you can share with a lot of guys and girls out there who I know will get a lot out of this chat. So thank you again for taking some time.
Oh man, of course. Thanks for having me. Stoked to be here.
Cool. Awesome. So if anyone who doesn't know you or what you're up to, maybe just say like where you're based and who you're currently playing with.
Sure. So I'm currently based in Sydney, and I kind of work for like a freelance mostly. So working with a bunch of different artists, mostly live, but some studio stuff as well. Recently it's been like Tkay Maidza, Thundamentals, who else? I'm terrible at this. Callie Holiday, Charlie, Chloe,
awesome.
Steven Taranto. There's so a bunch of different people, man. I'm terrible when I have to think about what's going on, but
no, I know what you've been up to, but just to share it with everyone out there. But I would highly suggest anyone who doesn't follow Jack already to hit up Instagram and check you out. I'll obviously connect all your tags and stuff in this chat. But speaking of that, like looking through your Instagram and your website and things, it seems like you're playing a bunch of different festivals, both like in Australia and in the past overseas, and there's like a lot of versatility and variation in the types of venues. I mean, at least that you post anyway. Like some are like big, kind of arenas, some are smaller, intimate club theater kind of things. So I'm curious, like just to kind of start off from that standpoint, like does your playing approach change like venue to venue, and like how does it change? How do you adapt going from like a massive arena to like a smaller like club kind of situation?
It does, and I think the more experience I get, and the more I work with different types of artists or band members or MDs or whoever it is, I kind of feel like I'm getting a different perspective each time I do something. So I feel like I'm probably more, I have a bit of a tendency to quite like hit quite hard. So I really like digging in, and I'm probably more built for larger, larger things naturally. But as it goes, I am playing in a lot of smaller venues often as well. And I think the challenge for me is not necessarily playing with dynamics or bringing everything down. It's when the music is, I mean, obviously like 99% of the work I'm doing these days is all to click, all with tracks, like plus people on stage. So so in your ears, like there's so much going on already. So it kind of takes you out of the immediate space or venue that you're in, and kind of gives you, as you know, man, and gives you a different, or kind of limits your spatial awareness and all that sort of stuff. So so that is something that I've had to learn to kind of manage and control and adjust, even if the music instinctually to me, and as we're rehearsing, whatever, is calling for things to be really like, you know, big and energetic and all of that. It's a matter of kind of being able to not tame it, but just kind of balance it a little bit more for the room. I mean, there are things these days that you can, you know, that are more readily available, like baffles to really like limit cymbal bleed and like all that sort of stuff. So it becomes problematic usually if there's a female vocalist or a vocalist who is quite gentle on the mic, and that's happened. You know, that happens quite often. Like I've worked with the first one that comes to mind where we started using some baffle type things to really cut down the bleed was I subbed for my mate Jan, who called me for Jared James. So I did a bunch of stuff with Jared, and Jared's music is, as you probably know, is very kind of more on the mellow side. Drum tones are very kind of like vintage sounding, some electronic stuff as well, and he's like very gentle on the mic. So and the stages we were playing and the things we did, like we did a TV thing and a festival, so both things were kind of like, he was kind of right there. So, and in rehearsal it was very evident. So we tried to we put out some baffles. I, you know, probably played with lighter sticks, just things like that to kind of to just assist in those situations, because it is challenging, and it is like, I've noticed as well, I play quite emotionally, I would say. So if I'm, which is another interesting challenge when you're playing some of these gigs that often are so rigid in the parts that you're playing and very locked in. When you have that kind of emotional connection to the music or something inside of, and I've spent so much time developing a certain skill set where I can hopefully respond musically and spontaneously in those situations, but having to kind of control that, and as well as the volume thing is an interesting one, and even to the extent of like, I mean, I know you've had Joel on. I mean, you had a bunch of my mates on. When I first saw you doing the podcast, I was like, oh, there's Danny. I've like toured with Danny back in the day. Darren, I've like known about for years and I hung out with a couple of times. Gareth, I went to school with. Like, all like there's and obviously Joel, I've been working with recently with Tkay. So I was like, oh, all mates, which was nice.
That's cool.
But yeah, with Joel, like he's very. I mean, as you know, he does a lot of work with broadcasting and that sort of thing. So he's very sound focused, and like with the TK stuff, like we've had discussions about, you know, certain symbols at certain times in songs and how that may or may not be clashing with, you know, with frequencies with the vocal, with T's vocal and like things like that. So getting quite specific about those sorts of things. So depending on, and I take those sort of learning and experiences and try and apply it to other situations and just be aware of those things. So playing in different rooms, and there is seemingly it's like, oh, there's just less people or it's just a smaller space on stage, but there is obviously a lot more that can go into it from a sound perspective, and just trying to control and being aware, I think, of your, like I said, I tend to be quite emotional playing, so I enjoy kind of like adding things here and there and trying to like be spontaneous and not just be like, this is just the track and this is just, because I feel like in some of those situations I almost might as well not be there and just save everyone some money, you know. So I'd rather kind of, if I can add something in a tasteful and musical way, that's not clashing frequency wise or volume wise, then I like to do that. But I know, you know, all the MDs and everyone has their different taste and everything. So I have my base of like what I think is cool. But I'm obviously more than open to taking on everyone's advice, and sometimes the artist will say stuff, you know, to them, like it's all communication, or you're going back and forth with front of house. And I'm lucky to work with with the people in all those respective roles, all top of their game in Australia. So so I always try and just soak up everything I can and apply it and try and enhance whatever it is that I might bring to the table. So so the venue thing's interesting.
There's so much there that I think we could like really dial in on in terms of like the sound thing, the energy thing, like working with different MDs and their preferences and how that affects your own individual personality, like, and what you bring, like finding that balance there. Yeah, there's a lot there, man. But one thing you said that resonates with me, that I've been in situations before as well, of like being on a gig where they want energy and they want vibe and they want big, but like not loud. And it's like that's really hard to like do that, you know. Because I actually just interviewed a buddy of mine like last week, like who is in a situation where they're playing with a lot of energy, but like have to be very conscious of like dynamics and not like being just being too loud in general. But he's like, you can't fight physics, you know, you can't fight physics. Like if you want this, like it's gonna be like full to some degree, but at the same point there are obviously things you can do to counteract that. It's just it's really something you have to work on. I've found anyway, like you have to consciously work on that.
Definitely. And I think, and like anything, I think the first step is just being aware of it and being open to being told about it. Like, you know, there's always been running jokes with, you know, friends, you know, playing, even if we're playing cover gigs, like, oh, that guy's loud and whatever. And it's just how I naturally play. But again, being open to it and still being sensitive and kind of switched on enough to know when it's right and when it, you know, and when to really, you know, take on everything we were just discussing and kind of apply that. But there's a lot of balls to juggle in that context, in that sense. But it's cool. It's exciting.
And I guess like playing wise, do you find that you're playing like you're choosing to play, or you're conscious of playing different like fills or grooves, like depending on the venue? Like as we know, like if you're in an arena and you're playing heaps of ghost notes, it's probably not translating as well as if you're in like an intimate club thing. So are you thinking about that as much?
Yeah, I try not to think about it so much in the moment. It's more of a I'll kind of prep for that going in, I guess.
Yeah, sure.
I do like to my mates kind of tease me for like filming everything that I do, and like, oh, there he goes again, putting up his camera. But some of it is, apart from like kind of the social media like aspect and all that stuff, which is, you know, it is what it is. It's more for me to kind of go home and be like, or sit on when we're on the bus, like, or, you know, traveling or whatever, to kind of look at stuff and go over stuff and analyze stuff and see for myself, like what I think is working, what's not working, what I can tighten up for the next show, like as just a resource to kind of make things better. So yeah, I have been aware of those sort of things as well. So making sure that like you said, like in the bigger spaces, kind of taking care of business a bit more. But again, these days, man, I mean, PAs, there's so, you know, the sound systems are so great, and even if you're in smaller rooms, depending on where you're standing, you might not be getting the subtleties or whatever what's going on. So I guess not in a big way, but more in the stuff that we were talking about previously. So just being sensitive to who's on stage and the music I'm playing, I guess. But again, like we mentioned too, if they do want big and they do want, or like maybe just play with lighter sticks or like dampen the drum, like do try other things that you can kind of still do what you do, but seemingly to them there's a difference going on, and there is, but it's not necessarily changing yourself, it's changing the tools around you. Or, you know, even little things like having the mix softer in your ears, so you don't, you know, things like that, or like balancing how you balance the mix of the drums with everything else. So we all know if you can't hear yourself, I mean, for me anyway, like if I can't hear my drums, I'm going to dig in a lot more. And like 2 songs gig, I'm like, where's all my finesse and like chops going? Because I'm playing so hard and so energetically because I can't hear anything. But as soon as you hear, like if you ever push and you can, it might make you sit back a bit more and try and balance things that way. So there are all these little kind of tricks and things that I guess you can try and everything, but it just comes with a little bit of experience and being, you know, advice and suggestions, and trying to just, again, having the mentality of making whatever it is that you're working on, whether it's a session thing or live, just kind of wanting to make the overall product the best that it can be, and keeping that at the forefront, I guess. So yeah,
that's great, man.
Even though I might want to get heavy all the time, but that's
that's just that. Yeah, that's who you are, man. That's totally cool. But I think that's why I'm like it's so great to have guys like yourself on who are like working, you know, at the top of your field at the moment, and having all of this experience in needing to learn things like really on the gig, like on the job. Like there's not a lot of situations that can prepare you for that kind of stuff, like coming through school or learning, like drum teacher, you know, whatever. Like you might get a little bit of a heads up, but it's really like on gigs in situations where you're working with MDs and in venues where you're like, oh wow, I have to adjust this and I got to be able to change it like right now. So that's why, I love having you and the other guys I've had on, like, share this with, you know, the up and comers. I think it's really, really valuable. So yeah, it's super cool, man.
And it's the stuff that I guess is kind of a little bit less spoken about, the less obvious sort of stuff that it's kind of the 1%ers, and you're not really, I mean, playing like in a room with your mates or doing gigs where you're just playing through, you know, monitors on stage, and it's like, and adjusting volumes and everything is a purely physical exercise, and you just have to listen. Whereas when you're dealing with all this extra gear, playback and like in-ear monitors and all that sort of stuff, it just changes. It's just happening at a slightly different level, I guess. But just being open to it, I guess, is the gateway into learning. Well,
sure. That's definitely a mentality that can be carried over to a lot of different aspects, you know, throughout the career. Just being open, willing to learn, and willing to adjust, and that's huge for sure. Speaking of festivals and things like that, though, do you, like, I think a lot of drummers drummers and musicians who don't do those kind of things are interested in how, like, the logistics of that works. Like, you know, I've seen kind of how it plays out myself, but like through your Instagram, I think people get a little bit of an idea, like, you know, when you're doing the backstage setup and the rises and all that kind of thing. But maybe could you just talk us through like a typical like festival day, like a one day kind of thing? Like, how does that timeline play out? Like, when are you getting there? How much time to get to set up? Do you get a line check? Do you get a sound check? Like, how does that kind of run down?
Yeah, and just on the social thing, like that, I mean, that's cool that you said that, because that is kind of one of the things. I always had like a slightly strange relationship with social media. I'm kind of like I play music for a living, so you'd think I'd kind of be extroverted, but I do have that side of my personality, but I think I'm also quite a bit of a lone wolf in some ways as well. So kind of the idea of putting yourself out there on those sort of platforms is, initially anyway, was quite daunting. And I kind of had to find a way for me to do it that I felt comfortable with, and that I also felt was not just about me, and that hopefully it could in some way, like, it's the stuff that I try to kind of give some insight into some things that I thought I would maybe want to see back in the day, and things that would help me, and things that did, like watching. I remember watching on YouTube, like watching Rex Hardy's like videos of him, you know, rehearsing for things and just hanging out with the guys like at the gig or rehearsals, and traveling to and from shows, and like all that sort of stuff gives you a slight insight into what it's like. So then when you get there, if you're fortunate enough to get into that position, you kind of already have a taste of what it will be. So that's kind of my how I try and do this stuff on social media. But and in terms of a typical like festival show day, it depends, man. It depends on the artist, depends on your time slot, it depends on all those sorts of things. But generally, maybe I'll talk about I just did Spilt Milk with TK, and that was like a 4-show festival thing across Australia. So a typical show day for that would be, typical. So if we're not flying in the day before, and if it's all happening on one day, usually it'd be like a relatively early airport call time. We'll get there, usually as a group, load everything in, check everything in, and then, you know, go hang out for a bit, catch the flight. We'll get to the city that we're in. So usually early starts is what it will be. Just because, you know, especially if you're going somewhere like Victoria, where you've got there's always, like, even if you're playing in the city, there's like an hour travel from the airport into town. So it's like there's all these, you know, so days become quite long, even though a show may only be 45 minutes. So there's all, like, you spend so much time. And I think it's an Australian thing more so than anywhere else in the world, because most of our touring is all fly days. So we're kind of, we're spending so much time in transit as opposed to being on a bus overnight and then waking up in the next city. So it's kind of, Australia's a little bit unique in that sense. So we'll arrive in the next city. Usually, hopefully you get time to go check into the hotel, freshen up, do all of that. And then usually as soon as we can, I will go in with usually like the front of house TM or whoever will go in, monitors guy will go in and go in a little bit earlier. And as get show files loaded, get access to consoles, and for the musicians, depending on what time we have, riser access as well. So we'll go to the festival, get kind of sorted, find our kind of artist area, whatever, hang out, and then as soon as I can, I like to get to the riser, and usually you'll have a lot of time. So if you have a 4 p.m. show, you might have riser access from 2 or something like that. But if you can get there earlier, it's always better, especially with something like TK, where it's like the kit's kind of large. And there's electronic stuff involved as well. So you got to patch everything in correctly and all that. So the more time I have, the better. And again, with TK, like we've got such an experienced crew, like Billy doing front of house, Billy Johnson, Kane Phillips doing monitors, and these guys are all like working with anyone and everyone you can think of. So and Billy, unfortunately with Billy on that one, because he plays drums as well, so he'll help me like tune the kit while I'm kind of setting stuff up. And so it's very much a team effort. Like it's not a big crew, but everyone's kind of like helping out wherever they can, which is great. And everything evidently ends up running super smoothly. So once we get everything set up and mic'd and tuned, and again, tuning at a festival is kind of an interesting one when you're doing it on the day, because obviously the headliners generally will get in the day before. Like I think Post Malone was headlining the Split Wheel thing, so and Dom, but Dom Dollar doesn't have a band, so Posty's crew would get there like either the day before and then have everything set up and tuned and every band, and everyone rocks in, and obviously they have text and everything's doing all that. So there's a lot more time to play with if you're at that sort of level of on the bill. But for us doing it all on the one day, maybe a couple of hours pre-show, riser access, get that all done. And then obviously with something like this, with a festival thing in particular, budget depending, but with TK we're fortunate enough to always have like a full production rehearsal before we hit the stage. So initially when I started doing the gig, we did like a week or so of rehearsals to kind of get everything to a level. It was like the first few days would be like with the band, and then T would come in for and console and get everything fully kind of dialed in. And for anyone who's not familiar with that, it basically means that when you roll on stage, that your ears mixed is already there, and front of house is already at a certain point, so that people aren't just showing up and being like, here's let's give us some kick, and here's the bass, and so it's, because the reality is there's just not the time to do that in those sort of environments. Everything's very structured, everything's very timed out, down to the minutes. As you know, bro. So so you kind of got to work within that sort of time frame. Just remain calm, don't stress, just keep everything chill, get everything sorted as best you can, and then we'll hit the stage for the TK sets. Split was actually a little bit short. I think it was only like a half-hour set or so, but generally speaking, 45 to an hour, if not longer. And then just immediately after you're rolled off, you're back to pack down, and you're back to doing the reverse. So on those sort of gigs, there's usually playing backline gear. So you basically just, for TK, I'll bring cymbals and electronic gear. And then, so I'll put those on, take those off after the show. And then that's kind of the work day, I guess, done. And then, because of the time slots, generally speaking, we won't fly in and fly out on the same day. So, we might either hang at the festival or go to the hotel and grab dinner or whatever, and then do it all again the next day, fly out at whatever time, head to the airport, and then back home. So, or back to the next city. So, that's like a rough, vaguely like typical sort of setup day for a festival. Obviously, if you're touring and doing a headline run, you got a bit more time. And that's the other thing I should mention in terms of having everything prepped before, like in a full production rehearsal, is because there's no sound check time at festivals. You get to line check, but you're not sitting there trying to get everything dialed into the space. It's like it's got to be good to go from the outset. So again, headline tour slightly different. Again, good to have everything prepped, but there's more time to play with everything and get things kind of dialed specifically for that space. support run, not so much. More inclined with or in line with the festival sort of setup. So you're getting there very limited time to set up, sort of rolling in, rolling off. And again, with a support slot, usually not even on a riser. So you're kind of dragging gear on, dragging gear off, like setting up side of stage, usually in the dark, like trying. So it's a whole thing, but you kind of get used to that, and it's humbling, and it's weird, like in my situation, because as a freelancer, I'm not, part of a band who's kind of like experienced the kind of the hard slog stuff, and then you kind of grow and grow, and then to the point where you now have techs involved, and every show you do is almost at that level. So with me, it's like I'm jumping. Like there was a situation last year where like I'd headlined, I'd done a tour with Thundamentals, and we'd headlined like Metro and a bunch of places in like around the country. And it's like, as a headliner, you got all the time that you need, yada yada. And then like a week or so later, I was back at the Metro with, and Metro is like 1,200, I think something like that in cap in Sydney. And then a couple of weeks later, I was back there with a different artist, but supporting, and it's a totally different, and no one cares, and it's fine, but it's just the reality of like having to, as a freelancer, having to adjust to the different time frames and the different size space that you're dealing with, and like all that sort of stuff. So that's an interesting one to you kind of always feel like you're in slightly in a bit of a washing machine or pinball machine type of, not really sure, like it's just an interesting thing that I've found, kind of jumping from kind of not only artist to artist, but level of show to, so it's interesting. But again, always, stay humble. No one wants to hear that you were here the other week headlining. No one cares that,
Yeah, for sure.
Just every day is a new day, and you just rock in and you do the job that you've been hired to do. So
yeah, man, that's incredible experience and advice. And I think like it just really drives home that fact of just having your drumming like skill set and everything so like as dialed in as you possibly can, so that when you've got all these other factors coming in, like you're playing backline gear and you've got limited time to set up, and your mix maybe isn't exactly right venue to venue, like that doesn't affect how you play. Like that doesn't affect the actual product that you're giving. Like that other stuff is like, it's superfluous at the end of the day when you've got an audience just watching you. And again, similarly, they don't care that you've like got up at 5 a.m. They don't care that you're playing gear you're not comfortable with or whatever. Like it's just becomes about like putting on the best show you can, whether you're headlining or supporting. And but yeah, I think you're just such a great testament to that, like where you can just be solid enough to deliver like an awesome playing result, whatever you're doing. But I think that's something that's really good to kind of share with people. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, to share with people. It's just like, yeah.
The results probably do vary from night to night, but but the intention is there to keep it kind of the same high like bar that you set. So but yeah, you're absolutely right. Dealing with all the extra stuff that you have to work around that kind of makes things challenging. And there's always some sort of outlier on a show, even if everything's dialed and perfect. There's always things that can happen. So
crop up.
And just being calm under any sort of. I mean, it's not pressure. Pressure's like, I'm not in the military or something like that, but it's like it's a certain type of pressure or something. So just being cool and collected in those situations. So
yeah, for sure. I mean, you mentioned about like climbing the ranks of being in a band and it's like climbed up and gained success and popularity. But I mean, you've done that. I mean, I think we all do that as freelancers, like in our own way. You make connections and you meet people and stuff, and so it's our own little business and own little brand in a lot of ways. But now you're at a point where you're doing, like I mentioned before, some incredible gigs and tours and things that I think a lot of drummers, and musicians aspire to do. So like looking back on your career path so far, like what do you think have been some of the most like important and defining points maybe that have kind of, made you level up so to speak, like from like moving to Sydney and like to meeting the people that you have met? Has there been like particular situations or realizations you've had where you've been able to like get to the point you're at now?
Man, so many. I wouldn't even know. Wouldn't
Yeah,
even know
I know it's a broad question, but yeah, just
yeah.
like yeah, if there's anything like that you recall as being like, this gig or this particular person kind of put me in touch with this, and that led to that kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I will say that I'm a pretty serial reflector. So anytime I'm in a new situation, I like to spend time thinking about and making sure I'm across how everything has kind of come to be, and using that to inform not only where I am at the time, but to inform future decisions or future moves or whatever it may be. Because once you are kind of in it to some degree, things can be a little bit blurry and things can be a little bit chaotic. The nature of the nature of how the industry works in this particular role, it can be hard to kind of find your center and kind of remember like how things have kind of eventuated. So even though it's you were the one that's there, but I kind of like to keep track of those sorts of things and make sure I am across the whole picture. So yeah, definitely moving to Sydney was a big one. I mean, I grew up in Victoria, kind of in a small coastal town. It's a little bit bigger now, but there wasn't a lot happening down there musically, and I never had it. I mean, I never had any. Not that there couldn't be. I mean, I had, there's bands and stuff that have definitely come out of there. Ocean Grove's called Ocean Grove. I assume that's connected to that. Little River Band, Jet, like there's a bunch of bands that have come like from kind of the surrounding areas, but I always had the aspiration to kind of be in a bigger environment and kind of whether that be somewhere like New York or LA or Sydney or wherever it was, just like a kind of a major music capital, if you will. And then eventually made that move, and then slowly kind of works, as you said, like to some degree, you work your way up the ranks, and you meet certain people. I met people early on, like I met my friend Jan in Boston really early on, and apart from our friendship that's developed over the years, like that particular connection in a professional sense has led to working with artists like Joy, Tandy Phoenix, Jared James, so just off that one particular thing that kind of branched out, in that branch led on to other things, and again, had I not had things together on the first time he tried to put me on, and again before that, I'm pretty sure within the first time meeting him, he like messaged me the next day and said, "Oh, can you cover me at like just at a local cover thing?" So that was kind of like before he felt comfortable putting me on certain levels of shows. He maybe, whether he was doing it deliberately or not, I'd kind of been tested in other kind of lower level things. So so again, I guess in that sense, always whatever it is that you decide that you're offered or that you decide to say yes to, just trying to do the best job that you can in that particular environment. And then, it may lead to other things, it may not, but at least you've done what you can do in that particular setting. So yeah, so that's an example of kind of one thing leading to another. And to this day, like if he needs someone, I'm kind of like one of the few guys that he'll call to jump in for him, which is lovely. And there's a few guys that have kind of been like that. Obviously, like the Ricky Lee situation was a little bit different because that was me kind of reaching out kind of cold to different people. And that, again, I'd heard about how Brett Garza did kind of like when he was kind of an unknown guy living out. I mean, he grew up in Ballarat, which is kind of like regional Victoria. I was coastal Victoria, but still somewhat isolated from the rest of the country and the rest of what was happening. But, the legend goes that he sent a tape out and Glenn Wheatley got a hold of it. And next thing you know, he's in Farnham's band and Whispering Jack was taking off things on the record, and, and now Brett's who it is. But so I kind of had some of that inkling and mentality of just like of finding ways to get out of where I was and to expand from where I was. And the Ricky thing was one of those situations, but that's worked less times than it has. Like there's definitely been other times and other people I've reached out to over the years and nothing's eventuated or you don't even hear back, and that's just the reality of it. But that was just one that did, and I think having that kind of, again, once people see you do one thing, it kind of, not that it like leads to hundreds of offers and it's like, oh, I can't manage all this. It's like it kind of just puts you in a light that people go, oh, he's working at a certain level, so it kind of makes them comfortable to then potentially hire you for other things or or whatnot. So, and then, yeah, man, you know, there's been a bunch of ways that other things have happened, like the TK thing. I it's the first time I'd worked with Joel. Like Joel called me for that. It's the first time he and I had worked together, but we'd kind of known of each other, and I had a bunch of mates that had worked with him over the years. So, and then the bass player in that Joel, he and I had worked together years before that, and then like kind of ended up on this thing together. So, and he's one of my, you know, he's such a legend and an incredible bass player and guy. So I'm stoked to be on that with him. And then actually connected to Joel. The Thundamentals thing was another one where it's like I'd met. I'd done some work with like Tim and Matic, like back in the day, like not long after I moved subbing for another good drummer mate of mine, Dom Cabrera. And I had to cover some stuff for him. And then the MD on that gig was Carl DiMattega, and then did the stuff with Tim, a handful of things. And then 5, 6, 7 years later, Carl was MDing and writing with Thunders, and he called me and said, man, can you sub for this festival in a few days' time? And that led on to me working with the boys like for the last like 4 years now. So yeah, so the connection thing kind of happens in various ways, and you don't know like how, like when it's going to kind of happen. But I guess trying to just keep making a point to, I don't really like the word network. I feel like it's kind of always got a bit of a weird undertone to it, kind of like handing out business cards and whatever. But that's fine if that's the thing. But I, you know, when I first moved to town, I was like, you try to meet people and you try to find like-minded people, and you know, I would go to jam sessions, and I would, you know, and that stuff definitely led to different things over the years. But I think that's something else that's cool about social media these days, is you can kind of connect people either with messaging directly or just putting yourself out there, and people can lots more people can see what you can do, what sort of thing that you're about, without actually having to necessarily be out there. You know, at the end of the day, you still, if it comes to a professional situation, you're still going to have to be able to cut the gig and cut the work. But the video thing and everything doesn't only gets you so far. But it is another tool to kind of make connections. And there are people that I have, which I can't think of anything at the moment, but connections I've made in an online context that have eventually led to something here and there. But you know, but generally I like to kind of meet people in person, and even if it's a quick thing, you don't know, like you might meet them quickly and then you're online and like kind of chat to each other every now and then all of a sudden like that happened with an artist that I again subbed in for last year, George Alice. And she's like a really cool kind of pop electronic artist, and she was supporting King Stingray, and like her and I had met doing a festival, doing Yours and Ours like years ago, and I think we met in passing very briefly, and then kind of stayed in touch again very intimately over the years, and then just happened to be she needed someone, and then you know that we were playing the M-War together. So it was just one of those things that took over like a 7-year span, and it was like one show, but it's like that's how some of those things kind of eventuate, and one show could turn into another 10 years of work. You don't know. So it's a weird kind of map of how everything kind of comes together. But you do get to the point where it does become, you realize it's quite a small scene, and everyone kind of does have some sort of connection in some way. And you know, you might start working, like I started working with my mate Mitch Clues, a phenomenal guitarist in like a pop sort of setting, and then that led on to he and I working with another phenomenal guitarist like in the progressive world, Stephen Taranto, a few years later, just because of our shared love and his connection, like Mitch's connection with that kind of scene, our shared love for that progressive sort of music. But Mitch and I started working together in like playing with like Samantha Jade, or doing like a very pop sort of, you know, pop star sort of thing. And that led to, you know, a few years later, we were on stage with 2 guitars and drums playing like odd, you know, progressive music. So it's, you know, things evolve how they evolve. But again, just trying to keep good relations as best you can throughout your career, and not necessarily going in with the mentality of this person's going to offer me work, but just trying to just connect on a human level. And you know, see what, and things may eventuate from there, they may not, and that's just what it is. But it's a very much a people industry, and very much a I kind of don't like the expression it's who you know, but it's kind of because it's so the Wild West and so kind of unstructured. People are calling on their friends to help them out with things, to pull them in for things. And, like Cam, whose studio I'm at today, shout out to Cam. This is where he runs a company, Just So Creative, which is like an MD production company. And I got a call to work with an artist that he was MDing. And we did that. And then Cam MDs a bunch of different artists. So that kind of led on to Charlie, led on to Chloe, led on to a bunch of different people. Just through that one kind of connection. Again, you do your job the best you can, and then you guys connect on a level and you become mates. And then it's like, if he needs someone, again, I'm one of a handful of guys that he'll call to when things are happening. So so you just kind of don't know, I guess, how it all happened. I guess, but this is very much in the kind of the session sort of freelance sort of world. Yeah.
But I think that's so cool, man, because like you said, it is kind of the Wild West, like the freelancer world. There's no rules, there's no set path, there's no formula, but I think that's what is so like great about the industry too, is that you can choose your own path. But there's things that just keep coming up, like time and time again when I talk to musicians about like how they've got to where they've got to, and it just comes back to like being a nice person and nurturing relationships and not burning bridges with, people that like you say, you met someone like years before and just kind of kept in touch, and then like it leads onto a gig, later on down the track.
Yeah.
Like that doesn't happen if you're not cool and if you're not like humble and just willing to like appreciate and respect the relationships that you develop with people. But also, like when it does time to come and like to play, again, like just being ready, and having all that, like all the things you put out there, whether it's on social media, this is what I can do, or whether it's how you talk to people saying, I want to work for you. If they say, okay, let's go, let's play, like you want to be able to like back up all of that as well, and not be like, oh, okay, well, let me just practice for a couple of weeks. Like, sometimes it's not even.
That'd be nice. A couple of weeks of prep, that'd be nice.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. But that's cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, in another situation, like my mate Billy Davis, who's another MD and amazing keys player and everything. But like I met, and just reminded me of the Adelaide connection. I met Billy like side stage. I think we may have said hello, and that was it. And then that led on years later. I got a call for Wafia, and now he's calling for Just Meowboy. And it's like, again, you just kind of connect over, and it's, but we'd never hung out. We'd never like, it had just been super in passing, super like, oh, we kind of know of each other. Cool. Nice to meet you. And then, and then again, this would have been probably 6-7 years ago as well. So it's just like, you just don't know. I'm just trying to leave a cool first impression, and I guess it's interesting, but it's very it's kind of scary at the same time, because it's almost like you live or die based on what people think of you, personality and all of that, which is kind of, you can see the dark side of that, which leads to people kind of potentially trying to conform and kind of losing their own identity and trying to and thinking they need to be something in order to get somewhere. So, and I think that's kind of a dangerous sort of path to take, and obviously the entertainment world is riddled with, people trying to, be people that other than that themselves, but I think the irony is that I think the more you are yourself, the more people kind of relate to that and connect with that. And then I think that kind of helps, when people want to call people for things, the idea of being around someone who's kind of cool and chill and relaxed, and someone who's real versus someone who they feel like is trying to like, who has an agenda or anything like that. So it's interesting. It's like a real psychological sort of study. A psychologist probably have a field day with a bunch of musicians, but
oh my gosh, absolutely, man, absolutely. I mean, just like you said, social media in general is so can be a dangerous kind of place to live in.
As well, sure.
I'm a huge like advocate for using social media as in a positive way and in an educational way, like like you're saying before about like sharing with your younger self or other people who you think might not have had exposure to some of the things you're doing, and just kind of sharing like this is how it is on a reality level. You know, that's cool. And then, you know, if you're putting up things of you playing as well, like we all do, it's kind of more like a documentation, like a timestamp. Like this is how I'm playing at the moment. This is what I'm working on. This is me here. Whatever. You know, it's not from like an egotistical point of view. It's just from like a sharing point of view. So, but absolutely. Yeah, I think, but I think, like as you're saying, like speaking about MDs and working with different MDs, it says on your website that you're a musical director as well. And have you done like what kind of work have you done in that capacity, and what are your responsibilities in that sense, like from a drumming from a drumming point of view?
So I guess the first artist that I eventually started MDing for was Ricky. We went there were when I joined there was one person doing it, and then another mate of mine, Luke, ended up doing it, and then he ended up moving to Nashville. Actually, there's another weird connection. So Luke O'Day, who was playing guitar with Ricky when picked me up from the airport when I first joined the group, was in the group for years, ended up moving to Nashville, and then he ended up he basically runs the label That Sound now, which is a sample library that's now being bought by Splice. So he eventually ended up running that, and that's the connection with me, how I've done a bunch of sample packs now with him. So that was another weird, I've got a bunch of questions about how the hell, how did that happen? I'm like, it's just I don't even know. That was just that was a weird connection from back then. And yeah, but anyway, so he ended up moving to Nashville. I ended up kind of getting asked to take it over. And then, so basically, it involves putting a playback rig together, for the various shows, sitting down with the artists and, talking about, and figuring out what it is that they want the show to be, adding, production elements, transitions, intros, things like that. But it's been mostly in the pop R&B sort of space that I've done that, and not for a little while actually. And then there are a bunch of shows that I've done where I've had to where I'm just running the playback. I haven't been involved in the back end side of it, but as the drummer, often they're like, "Oh, the laptop seems to sit nicely next to you, so you can on smaller budget type things." That's often the case. So so I've got probably more experience just running playback than I've actually got building shows and stuff. But I've definitely done it for a few artists, and then there are some artists where I've where you kind of end up doing both, or someone else will run it on the day or what have you. And I kind of did the similar thing with Steven Taranto as well, when he was first kind of putting his live show together, which was a slightly different approach, because it was obviously the music's very different and all that. But again, same sort of elements, kind of getting the stems, getting the files, getting them into a session, cutting everything up, arranging things how you want. And it's a very collaborative sort of process. But I mean, someone like Cam and a bunch of other people I've worked with are much more skilled in terms of the production side of things, and really making things a big kind of pop and type extravaganza, if you will. But yeah, I've got some experience doing some of that stuff, but I haven't. Yeah, like I said, I haven't MD'd officially for. I did a gig with Ricky the other day, so I guess that's a lie. But in terms of, I haven't built a show for a while. And to be honest with you, I'm unsure. Sometimes there's so much extra responsibility involved and extra time involved, that sometimes I do kind of like the idea of, in a session sense, when it's not your project, kind of like the idea of going in and doing the best job I can playing drums, and then kind of jumping into the next thing. Sometimes if you are trying to balance a lot of different artists playing drums or playing whatever, and then you're trying to do some show building and stuff at the same time, it can become a lot of crossover and a weird sort of balance. So
yeah,
in the tech side of things, I don't really have that sort of brain. I don't love the tech, even gear and stuff like that. It's only semi recently that I've been decided to pay more attention to get. I always had the mentality from a playing perspective of I want to be able to play, and because you have to play. I think as drummers, especially with backline and all that sort of stuff, we often have to playing our instrument, unless you're touring your whole stuff, you're rigging a truck and everything, which again in Australia doesn't happen as much. But So you're always playing different kits, you're always dealing with different gear. So I think I always had the mentality of I just need to make it happen on whatever I have. And I think there's an element of that that's cool. But the other side of it is that when you get into really specifics of how you want things to sound, everything you need to be across gear and how, how certain types of dampening affects the sound of the kit, what, where you're placed on the stage, how that affects, like all those sort of things. And especially in the studio, obviously it becomes a whole other ball game as well. But yeah, in terms of like, outputting this from there and then setting up, like that's just, I don't, it's not really my thing. I've done it. I have some experience in it, but I think having been on both sides of the equation, I think, and doing shows after having done that sort of stuff, I'm like, it is nice not having to worry about that side.
Yeah,
that side.
sure.
And often on the kind of, again, the smaller budget things, you're kind of wearing all those multiple hats at once. Whereas like something like TK, whereas like everyone kind of has their own role, which is nice. Playbacks run off stage, so no one's having to think about any of that sort of stuff. And the show's built and everything prior, and everyone's got their own thing. So that sort of setup is cool. But I think when you're building the show, when you're running the show, when you're like all that sort of stuff, I kind of feel like it takes me out of doing the best job I can actually playing, because it's, again, you're not talking about like long stretches of touring here. You're talking like quite short stints. So there's not really the chance to get everything settled and dialed before you hit the stage. So while you're on stage, you're still kind of finessing things, and then by the time you've done that, tour's over. So
you can't. So before you know it,
yeah. But it's an interesting side of things, and I think it's cool to have an understanding and appreciation of it. And if anything, I love going to shows and seeing the way that different artists do that, whether it's solo artists or whether it's bands or whatever. And I'm a big like. I love metal, I love all that sort of stuff, like heavier music, and even those sort of acts these days, they include a lot of production elements in it, like bands like Northlane and like Parkway Drive, like all those sort of acts now have a lot of, I saw Amity Affliction the other night, shout out to David Parksy from Melbourne, who was subbing on that. He absolutely destroyed that gig. It was amazing, on very short notice as well. So he's a tour and up and coming guys, he's definitely one to mention. But yeah, even bands like that who are like traditionally, very much bands and like everyone's playing, all those guys have a bunch of production elements and stuff these days. And I love it. It definitely enhances the whole thing. And it's interesting to kind of be on the other side and dive into how that all comes together. But so I'm interested and I love seeing shows yeah, we'll see what happens in the future, how much more of the actual like show building and stuff I do. But
I think it's like anything where you are building on your like foundational skill set as a drummer, like whether you're learning another instrument or you're learning about mixing or composing or whatever like it might be. If you have an appreciation for it, it just enhances your experience and how you can communicate with the other, with the MD or with the other musicians. It only makes you better as a player to have understanding of those different elements. Whether you actually end up doing them on the gig or not is a different story. But like if you can understand, and again, like if you know how to play bass and you're trying to figure out grooves with a bass player, like you can communicate in a different way than if you just have like a zero concept of what he's doing. So he or she's doing. I think it's great, man. And I'm a big believer in trying to just build on your skill set as much as possible to make you a better player. There's a lot we can do and a lot we can learn as drummers, like away from the kit that makes us better as players.
Definitely. Yeah. And the reality is, and even if you are building the show or running it or not, you're still playing with it. So and again, like I said, 99% of the stuff I'm doing at the moment is all with track or with click. So you've got to be able to understand. Again, kind of goes back to what we were saying initially about dynamics and about how to integrate an acoustic drum set with playback and with all those elements, especially when you're playing music that, if you're playing in Northlane or you're playing in Amity Affliction or whatever, like those are all like acoustic drum parts. Whereas a lot of the stuff I've been doing more recently is I'm kind of assimilating electronic or programmed drum parts live, and as well as combining that with the playback, and then as well as combining that with electronics on my actual rig. So it's a weird kind of combination of figuring out the best ways for that to sit. And sometimes you've got free reign with that. Sometimes the MD will be very heavily involved in what they want to hear. Or sometimes it's the artist. So it's a really interesting kind of combination of elements. But and again, just being aware of it is step one for sure. You know, and again, it goes back to the gear choose. Like with TK, I don't even take a ride on the shows. Like I don't need it. It's not part of this. So just like little things like that, just being aware of it. And again, that once you get all those sort of elements in, then it becomes like a front of house, like getting everything dialed level wise and everything in that sense. But again, I think just a bunch of the influences and stuff that I've had have really helped basically inform how I approach playing in those sort of situations where it is like heavy track, heavy electronics from my end, as well as acoustic drums. So but each gig and each artist kind of has a different balance of those elements. But it is definitely something that you kind of need to be aware of. And across these days, I think if you're working, I mean, like I said, even if you're working even if your thing's in a heavy band or whatever, or you play 1975 or like whatever it is, like all those types of artists these days across the gamut, even if you're playing with Robert Glasper, a lot of those things now have electronics and stuff in their setups too. So it's like in some way, shape or form, all these things are kind of becoming a massive part of every sort of idiom of music that's around. So
I think we've definitely seen that transition from like being a drummer just being like playing this set of drums and cymbals like to morphing into where it is now, where of like if you're not like using triggers, you're playing with the track. If it's not a track, it might just be a click, or again, just having a bit broader perspective on what might be involved in being a quote unquote professional drummer these days. Like it's a lot more than just like being great at playing drums. And like, of course, that doesn't mean to say like you should slack off on like being as great as you can on your instrument, but it's just knowing that there is probably going to be more involved than just having your coordination down and having your your grooves down and all that kind of stuff. Like once you get out on the scene a little bit more. But you was talking like just about majority of your stuff at the moment being with clicks and tracks, and just from seeing you play online, like one of the things that really like impressed me about your playing is like just consistency, like time consistency. It's like super solid, like with the track, whether it's a groove or whether it's a Philly, lick chop thing. And I think like sometimes drummers, like the groove might be there, but like if they go to play a lick, it doesn't have the same time feel as the groove, or like it doesn't lock with the track the right way, but you seem to have that really dialed in. So how did you approach like really strengthening that internal clock when it comes to like linear phrases, or just like breaking away from like a simple like kick snare thing to actually putting in some stuff?
Sure. Oh, first of all, thanks, man. I appreciate that. I feel like that's one of my, if I'm 100% honest, that's a little bit of an I feel like it's something that can definitely improve. And again, when you are playing with a click, everything's very evident, right? So you can't really get away with much. So I think I'm probably my own harshest critic in that sense, and always wanting to make sure I'm where I want to be intentionally. And obviously the reality is we're all human, and there is going to be some fluctuation. And the TK gig is an interesting one actually, because and the Thundamentals one is another ballgame again, but more in the hip hop space, you're dealing with drum parts or programming that aren't necessarily gridded, or if they are gridded, they're not gridded like down the middle. So you might have kicks that are on, and you might have a snare that's back, and the hats might be doing their own little things. So trying to like simulate that stuff in the best way without it kind of sounding robotic and mechanical is interesting, to the point where sometimes like if the track drums are not in, we might straighten things up a little bit just to still keeping the essence of the feel, but maybe not as much of the intricacy of because it's all well and good to program a hi-hat part or multiple hi-hat parts doing X, Y, and Z, but trying to play that live and make it feel good, which is the ultimate, I think, the goal at the end of the day anyway. No one in the crowd's saying, oh, the top hat in the production is not there. What's going on? Like, no one thinks that. It's as long as it feels good and as long as the elements are all there. I think that's the main thing. But in terms of my time's definitely gotten better having to play with a click, for X number of years now. And I had obviously spent a bunch of time as a kid practicing along with it and practicing along with records or whatever that was gridded, as well as things that weren't. So you kind of get used to playing, if I'm playing with Jeff Becerra, I don't think I'm playing with a click necessarily, but you're playing with an incredible feel and a rhythm section that's so locked in that you kind of it almost develops your ebbs and flows along with someone who is at the top of that sort of thing. Versus like having to play gridded with a click. So it's just, I think it's just a matter of doing it and practicing, being aware. Again, I think a lot of this comes back to, ironically, music comes back to listening and being aware of your own personal tendencies. Like, I know for me, my tendency is to push, when I'm playing group time or I'm playing fills, I'm kind of an excitable dude, and things, if I'm feeling, especially on stage when things are kind of amped and you get those, my natural inclination is to push. So so just being aware of that and kind of being able to put on the brakes and knowing that if you feel like you're playing, for me, if I feel like I'm playing back, often I'm playing right on. So being aware of those sort of subtleties. And I think it also depends on the musicians you're playing with as well. Like, playing with a click is one thing, but who you're playing with them. And like with Droll's got an amazing feel, and it's very much me almost following him, because I feel like he's so in command of what he does, and he knows exactly where. He's also been on the gig longer, but he knows exactly where things should be, and it seems like whatever he chooses is like that's I agree, So
Sure.
kind of follow him, as well as keep everything locked with a click and all that. So it's you're talking like very subtle things, but I think in terms of practicing and getting things to a like what I'm talking about, I think is maybe like another echelon of shooting for perfection and subtlety. Once you get to a degree of being able to play most of the time, like everything quite gridded and in time, so I think, but in terms of getting from A to B, that first initial stage, I think just spending as much time as you can practicing with a click, or like a loop, or like whatever it is that is kind of a consistent pulse, and practicing grooves with it, practicing coordination things with it, practicing fills with it, practicing at different tempos. And over time, it's only going to enhance things. And even if you're practicing just on a pad, sitting on the couch at home, whatever, like you can chuck, now you have a phone, you don't have to have a metronome to plug in or anything. You can just have your phone, just try different things, try different subdivisions. I know there are all sorts of like cool, kind of more creative ways to use metronomes as well, like playing, having the click on the upbeats, or having having a bar of time and having a bar off, and then seeing how accurately you come back in time. Like all these little things you can do to kind of test and challenge yourself. But obviously at the core of it, it's just a matter of being able to keep everything consistent, keep the time consistent, keep the space in between the subdivisions consistent, whilst also keeping which will be natural if you don't think about it too much, just your human sort of element and feel along with that. And the reality is the push and pull sometimes is kind of what keeps things breathing and keeps things alive. And sometimes things are a little bit pushed, maybe intentionally or maybe not. Maybe it's just a sort of emotional reaction, or it's a physical, maybe the cymbal's in a slightly awkward spot. So, you've hit things in there are all these different subtleties, and, maybe there's something going on with your mixer for a couple of seconds. So you kind of there's so many factors going on. But I think, again, being aware of it, trying to make things, I know Weckl talks about like the internal dynamics, like making sure, just the balance between your ghost notes and accents and all that sort of stuff is kind of in check. So, and all that stuff really brings things to life. And I think something like, which is a slight tangent, but something like transcriptions are interesting because it kind of gives you a taste of it. Like you can look at, here's Chris Ellison's transcription of Pliny's Sunhead record, for example, and here's all the notes he's playing, and someone can copy that and someone can play it note for note, and but the subtleties of what that human being brings to the way he's playing those intricacies is going to be different between human to human, which is which I think is a good thing. So I think having like note for note transcriptions and practicing things in that way is cool. But I think what I spent more time doing in terms of, which all comes back to time and dynamics and everything, is kind of trying to assimilate a vibe and listen to something enough where you get a feel for what the person might do or is thinking and how they kind of approach things. And then from there, you can kind of, you can put your Steve Gadd hat on, you can put your chain on, you can put your, your Nick Pedersen hat on. Like I did a session the other day where a mate sent me a thing and he's like, it needs to be like a Northlane vibe. And I'm like, amazing. Been listening to heaps of Northlane the past few years. I feel like, I think Nick's an incredible player. And I kind of feel like I have a sense of how he approaches things, what he's thinking. So it was like, you kind of assimilate that vibe for that thing. So you kind of put that hat on and almost, it's almost like acting in a sense. You kind of you almost embody something more than you are trying to like, oh, this is like a Nick Pedersen lick, or this is or whoever lick is subbing for someone else. It's like you kind of embody the approach and the vibe and the time and all that sort of like that emotional content versus the note specific things. And I think all of that comes back to the basics again of just making sure your time is solid and then from there you kind of get into the more like human side of it and like what the actual music is calling for and your foundation is there. Like I remember hearing I don't know exactly how he phrased it, but you probably heard the interview, but Marcus Miller was talking about like the transition from you go from in primary school, if you can dribble, or high school you can dribble, like you're talking about basketball or NBA. He's like, everyone's impressed and it's like, that's amazing. You get to college, it's like, that's kind of, that's cool, but you need more. And then it's like, once you get to the NBA and the professional leagues, it's like, no one cares about that. That's like the basic level, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's the same thing on a professional sense, playing music, like the playing in time and making sure there's a consistency between playing grooves and playing fills and a challenge that I find these days, to be honest with you, is going back and forth between songs. So sometimes songs that are like slightly different feels, but very much in the same world, and then slightly different tempos. So then switching between those, can I feel like when I'm initially going into it, I feel like can take a second to really settle. And especially when you're on stage, your perception of, as you know, your perception of time and speed of songs is very different to when you're in a rehearsal space and there's not, however many people watching you. It's weird mental things that happen. So being aware of that, again, something I've noticed when watching some stuff back of myself, like I'm like, oh, that I'm pushing too much there, or I feel like I'm a bit back. And it's like, again, and then going on to the next time, you kind of adjust and you realize, oh, that's potentially what's going on. So, so within the conversation of time and playing, and obviously the coordination thing is a big part of time as well. Like time, we think of like playing in time, but if you're having coordination or independence problems, that's automatically going to throw you off and throw your balance off and your comfort off and your touch and all that sort of stuff. So if those sort of foundational attributes haven't been worked on enough, or enough to the level of whatever it is that you're working at, then your time is going to be impacted by that, and then, and then I really like kind of seem to like guys who really embody, kind of when they're playing, they're quite physical, which is interesting because there are anomalies to this line of thought. But guys like Omar Hakim or whoever it is, like when they're playing, everything seems so fluid and everything's like you can tell they're very much like in the music that they're playing. But then I remember for the first time, kind of in the same world, seeing like Lenny White play, and I seem to like Return to Forever. And it's like you hear these massive drum sounds and like, specifically like the Romantic Warrior record. And it's like I had this image of what Lenny looks like when he played. And then you see him and he's very much like everything's kind of very finger orientated. There's not a whole lot of body motion. Hit's not very big, but it's just like everything's there, like dealing cards. And that's amazing to watch as well. But I think for me, naturally, like I'm quite a physical guy. And I think kind of, there's always some sort of motion, I think, when I'm playing. I know Weckles talked about that, kind of the time of motion concept, and whether it's like a technical specific thing or whether it's like a whole body sort of thing. And it's just it's interesting, and it's one of those elements as well that I think is always going to be in a work in progress. There's always to improve and tighten up, and it's also night to night as well. As you know, sometimes everything just feels great, sits really comfortably, and for whatever reason the next day you think it's going to be the same, but it's not. Maybe you've had something different to eat, or maybe like whatever it is, and you just, your body is perceiving things in a different way. So it's interesting. But
I think time is one of those things, man. There's so much in there, which again is so great. Like we could dive into anything, any one of those specifics, but time is one of those things, as you mentioned, like everyone's always getting better at it, and it just takes a lifetime to like really. I mean, it never has an end point. It's like music in general, like getting better as a musician. You never get to a point where like, right, my time is perfect, or like my feel is perfect, or I'm the best drummer. Like that never happens. It's just a constant, evolution and refinement. But I think
and the conversation feel.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go. Yeah.
No. I was just gonna say, like, I think like you just have to. One of those things, you can't get experience without having experience, but it's just doing it. So whether you're doing it like in a practice room, or whether you're getting to do it on, festival stages, and, you're getting experience playing on festival stages. So when you play arena stages, you're more solid, and then, it just kind of builds from there. But the foundation just has to be time spent on the instrument doing it.
Yeah, for sure. And the interesting connection between time and speed is also an interesting one. So you think, like, obviously these days, if we're playing most things to a click, like the speed and the time is very consistent and very like at one level. But you listen to like old Earth, Wind and Fire records or whatever, and everything feels great and the time feels great, but reality is that those records waver quite a lot, to the point where like by the end of the song are in a whole different stratosphere of tempo. It's interesting, and it's quite a nuanced conversation. But I think from a very foundational perspective, being able to play consistently with a click, parts, fills, whatever it is, switching from electronic stuff to acoustic stuff, and just working on your touch with different cymbals and different drums and pads and like all those sort of things all play a part in, I think, playing consistent time on some of the shows that we're kind of talking about. So
man, so great, so great. It's just great to again hear your perspective on all of this stuff, because you're someone who's really out there doing it and is working on it as well, which is really great to hear. Like like you're playing these huge gigs and shows, but you're still conscious and working on your own craft, and I think that's really inspiring for a lot of drummers out there, to see someone like yourself doing it, but still have that drive to get better. So man, this has been so great. I want to kind of be respectful of your time, obviously, and maybe maybe like finish up just like what's coming up for you, and where can people find you and keep in touch with what you're doing.
Sure. So in terms of keeping in touch with what I'm doing, like I have Instagram, I have Facebook. I don't really use Facebook much, but Instagram is Jack J Robert, because Jack Robert was taken, and I just added another J for Jack. So that's the origin of this handle. So that's kind of, I have a YouTube channel as well, which I think is just Jack Robert too. So that's all kind of connected. But in terms of what I've got coming up, like I said, just did a session for Mate the other day, which was really cool. Kind of first one for the year. And more, like I said, more Northland vibes, so very heavy sort of thing, which I loved, which was awesome to get to kick off the year with. I've had some stuff with Ricky that we've just done, and then coming up, I've got some stuff with Charlie. We got a couple of festival date coming up. I'm doing some subbing in for Jess Mowboy. My buddy who plays drums with her these days, I think he's obviously out for something, so Billy asked me if I could jump in for that. So that'll be cool. That's coming up. I'm working on Steven Taranto, who I mentioned earlier. He's working on a new record, which is super exciting, and he sent me a bunch of demos and stuff. So I've just kind of started going through that and trying to get my head around the insane writing that he's putting together, and making sure I'm across that. So yeah, hopefully sooner than later we'll get into the studio and start getting some of that stuff down. But yeah, man, apart from that, just like open to whatever's on the table and whatever comes through. So there's always, conversations going on, but
Yeah.
yeah, some things will happen, some things won't, and that's just the way it is. So yeah, so we'll see. But
Oh man. Well, whatever happens, I hope we get to like meet up in person one time and I get to see you
Yeah.
play like in the flesh. That'd be awesome. But yeah, man. Until then, thank you again for doing this. It's been
Thanks so much for having
awesome,
me, bro.
and yeah, we'll catch up soon.
Absolutely, bro. Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Cool.